They say time flies when you're having fun, and time was flying. I was nearing my end of high school years, another year or so. There was a change in the decade, something I'd never noticed before. It was a year where music was new and exciting to me because of discoveries and different sounds. I found a couple of muses that I would love through right now. And it was also the first of 3 years as either a singer or a songwriter or both that Irishman Johnny Logan won the Eurovision Song Contest. The year was 1980. I'm TC Kirkham. This is Vinyl Recall. Greetings, everybody. TC Kirkham, Vinyl Recall here, normally on the Kirkham Report. Thanks for joining me. It's up to 1980 on my year of my top 10 picks of each year, following the thread started by Vinyl Richie a few months ago, doing it in series form because it's just easier to do it that way for me. 1980. I'd gone through the 1970s as a novice music fan, and by 1980 I was turning 17 in March. I was a junior the first part of the year, a senior the following part of the year. I'd broadened my horizons as much as I still loved pop and disco and teen idols. I began to listen to new age. I began to listen to R&B. I began to listen to more heavy metal. And it all came together in 1980. There was a lot of great stuff that came out this year that I don't have on vinyl. I have mostly on CD. But the albums I do have on vinyl are top notch, and I'm happy to present them to you. Starting with number 10, album that by a band that I liked for quite a while. I'd liked them from almost the beginning when they had their first hit in 1973. Oddly enough, though, I never picked up an album by them until 1980. And it was at the very tail end of the 1980 that the album came out, and it was based on their biggest hit overall, what would become their biggest hit. But the album as a whole is stupendously good, and that's probably due to its producer, Emir, I think his first name is, Diodato. I'm a big fan of Diodato, his music, and he did a great job for these guys. Number 10 for 1980, Celebrate from Kool and the Gang. Came out at the end of the year. It features Celebration, Jones vs. Jones, Take It to the Top, Morning Star, Love Festival, Just Friends, Night People, and Love Affair. This is on, I don't own very many things on the Delight Records label on album. This one and another Kool and the Gang, and I think that's pretty much it. Love James J.T. Taylor's voice here. Celebration, of course, went on to become their biggest hit ever. I was always partial to Jones vs. Jones. It's a beautiful breakup song about a marriage that's on the verge of divorce, and it's a great song. I think it peaked at number 40 as the follow-up to Celebration. Take It to the Top did a little bit better as a single. But as a whole, this album is pure Kool and the Gang, as they are now. Of course, they started as more of a funk-oriented soul band in the early 70s. Sounds like Jungle Boogie and Hollywood Swingin'. But by this point, they had morphed into a disco light R&B group, and they were terrific, and I love this album all the way through. Kool and the Gang, Celebrate, number 10 for 1980. Another album that came out near the end of 1980 is at number 9. It wouldn't really explode until early 1981, which is when I picked it up. But this band had been touring and doing so much for the past 5 or 6 years that I'm sure they were beginning to wonder if they were ever going to really find a huge hit. This was the album that proved that huge hit. It not only gave them a number 1 smash, it gave them 4, I think, 1, 2, 3, for 4 top 40 hits, and they were really great, and they always were, but people didn't really know who they were until their radio started playing their biggest hit off this album, and then people went back and found the earlier stuff and all the punny titles on their albums. But they deserved to finally get the superstardom that they found in early 1981. Released in October of 1980, this is REO Speedwagon's High Infidelity. I had heard of the band, but I'd never heard any of their music before this album came out, and Keep On Loving You became a monster hit. In addition to Keep On Loving You, there was Don't Let Him Go, Follow My Heart, In Your Letter, Take It On the Run, Tough Guys, Out of Season, Shaking It Loose, Someone Tonight, and I Wish You Were There. The 4 singles were Don't Let Him Go, Keep On Loving You, In Your Letter, and Take It On the Run. Loved all 4 of those. Came with a great inner sleeve with picture of the band there and lyrics on the back. And of course they were on Epic Records. I've liked them since, and I remember later in the 80s when I've forgotten the name of the album came out. I Do Want to Know was the hit single off of it. We couldn't keep, we had a line at the record store I was working at. We had a line all the way down the strip mall to pick up tickets when they played Columbus, Ohio. They were always a favorite of the live crowds, and they really continue to put on great shows, you know, right up through their first breakup, and then they've been back together a couple of times with different members. Gary Richrath is no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. But Kevin Cronin, white-haired Kevin Cronin, which really freaked me out when I saw him last time, and other people continue on the legacy. Number 9, their biggest hit album ever, REO Speedwagon and High Infidelity. Number 8 might surprise people, but I've been into this band since the very beginning. I love the band. Have 5 of their albums, 4 the albums all the way up to mid-80s. And it was a different style of music. It was thrown into the new wave genre, and I suppose it has a little bit of new wave in it. But it's also got a little bit of alternative rock and a little bit of Canadian rock too. And Canadian rock and American rock are slightly different. Usually the Canadian bands don't seem to click big here. Rush is one of the few exceptions, but Chilliwack never caught on in a huge way. Jerry Doucette never caught on in a huge way. These guys did. And this whole album is fantastic. And I know some people that like certain songs of theirs don't like the whole album. I do. I've been a big fan from the very beginning. And as I said, I have most of their albums. And it has a lot to do with the fact that I love the lead singer's voice. Number 8 for 1980, the self-titled debut from Loverboy. They were kind of, I mean, to be honest, they were very much the Nickelback of their day. There were people that loved them, but there were people that hated them too. But their style was always great, and I have always loved them. This debut album featured The Kid Is Hot Tonight, Turn Me Loose, Always on My Mind, Lady of the 80s, Little Girl, Prissy Prissy, Teenage Overdose, DOA, and It Don't Matter. Mike Reno, one of the best frontmen of the 80s, absolutely dynamic voice coming from him. They put together some decent videos too. In the early days, most of them were performance videos. No special inner sleeve, but it was on Columbia. And they were kind of like my indoctrination into alternative new wave. Because like I said, they don't quite fit into the new wave banner, but they don't quite fit into the alternative banner. They're a little bit of both. A little bit of heavy metal, hard rock, pop metal thrown in too. But I've always loved them. I have, I think, the first 4 or 5 albums, one of which I only have on cassette. I forget which one. But they were great and always will be great, and I will love them forever. Number 8, Loverboy by Loverboy. As I said at the beginning of these shows, I only include soundtracks if they are overwhelming for that year. This album is one of those albums. There aren't very many soundtrack albums that truly have dominated American music. But they have happened occasionally. 77 was Saturday Night Fever, and 78, thankfully, with Grease, although they did try with Thank God It's Friday, FM, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Um, this was the same way. The movie didn't do as well. I mean, it didn't do badly. It was not a big money maker, and it was not a well-reviewed movie, even though since it's become a hit Broadway show, the album has always been a hit. The album was bigger than the movie, and that's because of who was in it. Um, Half of the album features Olivia Newton-John. The other half features Electric Light Orchestra. They're together on one of those songs, plus a few other artists that are fantastic, and they all combine to make the soundtrack from Xanadu one of the best albums of 1980. Number 7 on my list. My pal Dawn will love that. She loves this album. Um, on the Olivia Newton-John side, you had Magic, Suddenly with Cliff Richard, Dancin' with the Tubes, Suspended in Time, and Whenever You're Away From Me with Gene Kelly. The ELO side had I'm Alive, The Fall, Don't Walk Away, All Over the World, and Xanadu with vocals by Olivia. Um, Great shots from the movie. I actually saw Xanadu at a revival theater about a year and a half after it came out. I actually liked it. It was fun. It was goofy. It's not the best written film in the world, but the music is awesome. It really does have one of the best soundtracks around. Some Xanadu soundtracks do have custom labels. Mine did not. This is a repress. I don't think I picked it up until on album until 83 or 84. I had all the singles. And for all the bad publicity that Xanadu got, it actually did very well on Broadway. When we went to New York in 1988. We went to see 1988, 2008. Wow, that's a completely different time frame. We went to New York in 2008 to see Daniel Radcliffe in Equus. Xanadu was playing right across the street, and we considered getting matinee tickets, but none of us could really pop the extra fee because we had saved up so much money for the Equus tickets and then, the souvenirs, and we wanted to do some shopping, and we spent the day at Madame Tussauds and overpriced food at Planet Hollywood, which wasn't very good. But in any case, it was doing very well then, and the crowds were huge, and the movie crowds, I think it's a guilty pleasure for a lot of people because the music is so good, and even if the movie isn't that great, the music's listening to, very listenable. Number 7 for 1980, the soundtrack from Xanadu. I have often debated which of the albums by this group is my favorite, and this is it. Two other ones come close, 1976 and 1979, the years they were released. This one, there's just something about it that every single song is perfect. Even though, oddly enough, out of 4 singles off this album, only one was a top 40 hit in America. The rest were hits all over the world. For some reason, America never quite got fully on the bandwagon. We love them. The Mamma Mia movies are proof of that. But ABBA never really got their due in America. They consider America a failure. Considering how successful they are in Europe, I don't blame them. 1980's Super Trooper, number 6 on my list, is my favorite ABBA album. In addition to the only top 40 hit from the album, The Winner Takes It All, it also features the title track, Super Trooper, On and On and On, Andante, Me and I, Happy New Year, Our Last Summer, The Piper, Lay All Your Love on Me, and The Way Old Friends Do. Super Trooper, On and On and On, and Lay All Your Love on Me were official singles in America. Happy New Year was a promotional single at Christmas time. Nothing. I don't understand that. Super Trooper, On and On and On, Lay All Your Love on Me are 3 of my favorite ABBA songs. Love these. Love the album. Of course, again, they are on Atlantic here in the States. There is a lyric sleeve. They're the Atlantic label. It's a great album and deserves better. And deserves better attention in America. But the hits, they're remembered fondly by their fans, even if they didn't do chart action. A lot like some of the acts that a few months ago Robert Fitham was saying how they never had a top 40 hit, and it's because there was no rock chart at the time. For acts like Mountain and Creedence and all those. ABBA's the same way, and they did have a pop chart. They just didn't do anything. This album is great, and it's my favorite ABBA album. Number 6 for 1980, Super Trooper. And now we are getting into the top 5, where 3 of these acts, I suppose Loverboy would also fit that, 3 of these acts became very important acts in my life. And one of them already was. And the other one I liked, but I wasn't a huge, didn't know a lot of his stuff until I got this album. But let's start with number 5. When I was 16, a family friend named Kenna Kay turned me on to KREM FM. KREM FM, no longer in existence, I don't believe. Or if it is, they have different format. But at the time, they were album-oriented rock in Spokane, Washington. And they are where I first heard this group. I liked them from the very beginning, and I have been a die-hard fan for 40 plus years. I have all of the stuff they've done, except for a couple of the live albums. And the first album, which some people don't consider to be one of their best, to me, it shows them at their raw level. The level where they were just barely out of their teens, and one of them wasn't out of their teens yet. And they were working toward what would happen in 1983, which was an explosion that would make them megastars. But this album is where it started all, and 2 or 3 of the songs are still staples in their concert segments, and it's not surprising, because they were always favorites of the fans. But when you first saw the album, you wouldn't know how big they would be in 3 years when Pyromania came out. Number 5 for 1980, Def Leppard and On Through the Night. This is their debut album. Came out on my birthday in 1980, March 15th. Rock Brigade, Hello America, Sorrow is a Woman, It Could Be You, Satellite, When the Walls Came Tumbling Down, Wasted, Rocks Off, It Don't Matter, Answer to the Master, and Overture. I'm counting this because it is vinyl. It's not mine, it's Kim's. I have the CD. But I used to have the vinyl, and I don't know what happened to it. It's on the mid-'80s Mercury label when she bought it then. It is one of the greatest debut albums for a heavy metal band ever. And Hello America and Rock Brigade got quite a bit of airplay on KREM FM. I think they played Rocks Off and Wasted quite a bit too, if I remember right. But it set the stage for what would become the breakthrough when MTV hit, and they really excelled at making videos. The initial video, Bringing on the Heartbreak from High and Dry, and then later on the videos from Pyromania and Hysteria and Adrenalize to some extent would dominate MTV when they were out, and they're a great band, and I will be a Lep head until the day I die, and it's because of this album. Number 5, 1980, Def Leppard, On Through the Night. Number 4, I surprised myself with this. This was not one of his bigger albums. I won it from radio station KJRB in a call-in, and was pleasantly surprised to find that I liked the whole album. And in fact, one of the singles that wasn't that big of a hit was my favorite song, and it hit number 1 on the Kirkham Report, which doesn't happen very often with acts like this. He would have one other number 1. I think it hit number 1 on my chart in the mid-'80s with Clarence Clemens. But I always liked his music. I liked him from very early on. He had his first hit, I think I was 10 or 11. But this album is great, and I think it's his best album of the ones I've heard, unless you count the live album, which came out right before this and was a classic. But this deserves to be heard and seen by more people, because it's a better album than anybody gives it credit for, and it's not one of those that you see people talking about when it comes to him. Number 4 on my 1980 list, Jackson Browne and Holdout. This features Boulevard and That Girl Could Sing as the singles. Also, Disco Apocalypse, Holdout, of Missing Persons, Call It Alone, and Hold On, Hold Out. I really love this album. I was not a huge Jackson Browne fan before this. I knew, the singles. Of course, I had the singles for Stay and I think I had the single for Boulevard before I got the album. And Doctor My Eyes was on Superstars of the 70s collection, compilation collection, lyric sleeve, and on Asylum Records, which he was with for years. His biggest hit, other than That Girl Could Sing on my chart, was his 1985. I want to say 1985 duet hit with Clarence Clemens, You're a Friend of Mine, which I love. I had heard a couple of Jackson's albums before this, and I wasn't that impressed. A couple of older friends had them and were nuts about him. They didn't like this album, and I did. I thought it was great, and I still do. That Girl Could Sing is still one of my favorite songs by him. I wish more people would talk about it, because, as I said, it gets better. It deserves better than it gets. Number 4, Jackson Browne, Hold Out. Number 3 is second favorite album by this lady, but it's way higher on the list because the other one was in a year that was so full of stuff that I loved that it got stuck near the bottom of my top 10. There is not a bad song on this album, and I can't wait for the reissue, which is coming out later this year. Because it's going to be on 180 gram vinyl, going to be on colored vinyl, and going to have a lot of fun, and it's from Vinyl Me Please. And I love this album. It is a second favorite album. The only one I like better is Heartbreaker, and it's this close. And it came out in late 1980, and it was titled for the first film hit she would have. Great album all the way around. Number 3 for 1980, Dolly Parton, 9 to 5 and Odd Jobs. This includes 9 to 5, Hush by Hard Times, House of the Rising Sun, Deportee, Plane Wreck at Los Gatos, Sing for the Common Man, Working Girl, Detroit City, But You Know I Love You, Dark as a Dungeon, and Poor Folks Town. 9 to 5 was Dolly's first pop number 1 hit. It was a country number 1 hit and an AC number 1 hit as well. Triple threat. I love this picture of Dolly and a dog in the back. It does have a lyric sleeve, and on, as you can tell, it's been well worn on RCA. As much as I love 9 to 5, though, it's hard for me to pick favorite songs, but there are 2 songs on this album that I adore Dolly's versions of. One is her disco dance remake of House of the Rising Sun, which actually charted on its own on the disco dance chart and peaked somewhere as a flip side on the Hot 100. Great version of that song. And I mean, that song is, I've heard so many different interpretations of it, and I've heard it actually sung to the tune of Amazing Grace before too, which I thought was interesting. That was by Red, White, and Bluegrass, if I'm not mistaken. But the song that really gets to me on this album is Deportee, Plane Wreck at Los Gatos. That was a Woody Guthrie song. I'd never heard it before. And you listen to this and you listen to Dolly's pain-filled vocals, you will cry. I swear you will. Love Sing for the Common Man. Love her cover of Detroit City and Because You Know I Love, or But You Know I Love You also. Working Girl, also a single from this album. Dolly, as you guys know, can do no wrong with me, and I love this album. It is coming out later on as part of the Vinyl Me Parton year. She's doing with Vinyl Me Please. I think it's the 11th and 12th album series. So I'll have to wait almost a year to get it. But I love this album, and it is just terrific. And Dolly proved to be quite an adept actress. 9 to 5 is one of the funniest comedies ever made. I still love it, and I always will. And the connection between her and Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, and also Dabney Coleman, fantastic. Number 3, Dolly Parton, 9 to 5 and Odd Jobs. Okay, number 2, I'm going to take a drink here. Number 2 was a revelation to me. I talked about this a few months ago on the Kirkham Report and on Influencers also. When I first heard this song, the title track from this album, something clicked in my head. And when I say that, I mean it literally. I knew I was listening to one of the greatest gifts God ever gave to music. It was before Whitney Houston. It was before Jennifer Holliday. It was before a lot of her other contemporaries from the 1980s. And she was 13 freaking years old. I could not believe what I was hearing. And so I said, I'm going to get the album, even though I really hate plaid, and that's what she's got on the cover. It looks like she's wearing a slipcover. But, oh my God, I have every album this woman has ever done. I play them constantly. I bought a box set with her stuff in it earlier this year. One of God's most perfect vocalists. And I don't say that about everybody. I say that about Karen Carpenter. I say that about Dolly Parton and a couple of other people. And this woman. And she left the business at the height of her fame. Number 2, Let Me Be Your Angel, Stacey Lattisaw. Stacey Lattisaw was 13 years old when she recorded this. And this album, she really did become my muse for most of the 80s when it came to female vocals. Every album I was there on release day. And I found an earlier album, When You're Young and in Love, later. I didn't even know it existed until it showed up in the cutout bin at our local record store. I thought this was the debut. It wasn't. She made a hell of a team with Narada Michael Walden, or Narada, I think it's pronounced when he used it for his name. Jump to the Beat, Dynamite, You Don't Love Me Anymore, Dreamin', Let Me Be Your Angel, Don't You Want to Feel It for Yourself, You Know I Like It, and My Love. People who have never heard Stacey, and there's a lot, don't realize that she was the groundbreaker. Not Whitney Houston, not Paula Abdul, not Janet Jackson. It was Stacey Lattisaw. At 13, Let Me Be Your Angel sent chills down my spine the first time I heard it. My favorite song on the album is the last track, My Love. Almost that happened on our first 3 albums, where the best song on the album was the closing song on the album. I showed this to you guys earlier. This is The Cotillion Years. This has all 7 of her albums, including her duet album with Johnny Gill. This is, if you like R&B and if you like Whitney Houston, you like Pebbles, you like anything like that, get this. You will not regret it. It is a collection of some of the best music of the 80s. And like I said, and I brought it up on Influencers, she walked away in 1990 at the height of her fame. She's now happily married, a mother of several kids. She and her husband have been married almost 30 years. They run a recording studio in Washington, D.C., where she was from. She is freaking amazing. Even now, she's still got the voice. She doesn't use it as much as I'd love, but I'm so glad I have what I have, because I never get tired of hearing this voice. There's the lyric sleeve. And she was on Cotillion. This was one of the first acts I knew on Cotillion. The only other one at that point was Sister Sledge, I think, that I knew on that label. If you don't know her, discover her. If you do know her, you probably know and understand the magic I think she makes. Number 2 for 1980, Stacey Lattisaw, Let Me Be Your Angel. Number 1 is going to surprise no one. Well, it surprised my mom. When I first got into the single of this song, which led to the album, and again, I first heard the full album on Creme FM's midnight album run. They played a whole album every night at midnight, and immediately, as soon as I could get somewhere, I was buying the album. They were full-on new wave, and the early pioneers of synth pop. And from that very first single, I knew there was something special. Now, unfortunately, they would do just 2 albums. But one of them is a premier guitarist who's been a part of I don't know how many different bands. And the other one, the singer, the writer, is one of the legendary producers of the 80s and 90s. Together, they came together to put together an album that to me is as magical as Miko's Star Wars Another Galactic Funk. I never get tired of it. I listen to it constantly. I have it on digital, I have it on CD, I have it on vinyl. And it's one of those albums. Some of the lyrics would drive some vinyl community members crazy because they don't like those nonsense lyrics that happen in a lot of the new wave synth pop stuff. I mean, you go back and you listen to some of the lyrics in Duran Duran or Kajagoogoo, you're just like, what are they trying to say here? This was the same way, but in the long run, it was a magical album. The single not only would hit #1 on my Kirkham Report weekly chart, it was the #1 song of 1980 at the end of the year. It spent more time on my chart that year than any other song. And even today, I listen to it. Even today, everybody knows it because it literally predicted the rise of MTV and was the first video they ever played. My #1 album from 1980, The Age of Plastic by Buggles. Trevor Horn, Jeff Downes, and some of the best music I've ever heard. This was on Island Records. Oops, excuse me. I had never had an album on Island Records, and within just months I would get Steve Winwood's Back in the High Life, I think it was. But from the second I heard Video Killed the Radio Star, which peaked at a measly number 40 on the Hot 100, I knew this album was going to be important in my life. It solidified my belief that New Wave was the future. It was to be what would be the next version of disco. And eventually, as I said last week, Robin Scott, otherwise known as M, saw that coming and mixed disco and new wave to come up with pop music in his album New York, London, Paris, Munich, which I'd mentioned last week. Living in the Plastic Age, Video Killed the Radio Star, Kid Dynamo, I Love You, Miss Robot, Clean Clean, Elstree, Astro Boy and the Proles on Parade, and Johnny on the Monorail. There is no more perfect synth new wave album than this. The closest that anything would come would be Gary Newman's album with Cars. I don't own that. I've heard it, but I don't own it. And maybe the debut album from the B-52s, which I also don't own. I have the singles, and I love Rock Lobster. But this is something I treasure. The second album, Adventures in Modern Recording, was released after Jeff had already left to help form Asia. And Trevor was producing for Yes, and he became a member of Yes in the process. But he would go on to produce, I think best known for producing Frankie Goes to Hollywood. The man had a golden touch. He wrote golden songs. This album is golden all the way around. And it is one of my favorite albums of all time, not just my #1 album from 1980. Buggles, The Age of Plastic. So, recapping my top 10 favorite albums of 1980. Celebrate by Kool and the Gang, #10. #9, High Infidelity by REO Speedwagon. #8, Loverboy by Loverboy. #7, Xanadu Soundtrack. #6, Super Trooper by ABBA. #5, On Through the Night by Def Leppard. #4, Hold Out by Jackson Browne. #3, 9 to 5 and Odd Jobs by Dolly Parton. #2, Stacey Lattisaw and Let Me Be Your Angel. And #1, The Age of Plastic by Buggles. Everything in this top 5, except maybe the Jackson Browne, have had a big influence on my life and everything I've listened to since. It was the Buggles that led me to more experimentation with new wave. Stacey Lattisaw pushed me toward R&B, and in particular female R&B, and I loved that. Dolly Parton continued to light up my life every day, and Def Leppard became the first big heavy metal band I ever became a massive fan of. And all the other ones too. I love all of them, and I hope you do too, because If you haven't checked out the albums on some of these, you should. Um, Particularly if you're not familiar with Stacey Ladisaw, which I'm shocked to see a lot of the vinyl community doesn't know who she is. Um, you gotta find it. You gotta find it because it's amazing. And 1980 was an amazing year. Now, next year, 1981, was the year I graduated high school. I would be a senior. More changes were happening. I had a big cross country move from Washington to Ohio. And a lot of interesting music changed because when I lived in Ohio, in Washington, when I left Washington, AM radio was still the hot thing. When I got to Ohio, it was culture shock because FM ruled the waves, and that included rock stations, and all you heard on the AM was farm reports and swing music. It was a pretty interesting, eye-opening experience, and I will go into that on the next episode of Vinyl Recall. If you haven't liked or subscribed yet, please do, and if you have, thank you. Don't forget to share if you like what you see. I always hope that you share my stuff, and please leave a comment. I love hearing from you, and I'm trying to catch up on all the comments that have been going on the last couple of weeks, even though I've been kind of going crazy with this inspection, which we finally passed. Yay, yesterday. It's all done, all over. So things will get back to normal in the next few days. Hope you'll join me for all my regular shows weekdays at 4 p.m. on alternate Mondays with Finding Your Music Mojo at 6 p.m. live streaming, and daily Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific for TC's Obscuria Vaults. For Vinyl Recall, I'm TC Kirkham, the Kirkham Report. I'll see you soon. Ciao, baby.